All right, welcome everyone to the Boulder Insight June Tableau live session. This is the time when you get to ask us anything Tableau related, data related, and we do our best to answer those questions live and on the spot. So today we have a little mix up. We're doing a little bit of the girls taking over the world situation here, and I have two of my favorite people, Christy Clark joining us and Sarah Henriksen today. Christy and Sarah are actually people I've known for, oh my gosh, about a decade now in the Tableau world, who were also my teachers and my mentors on different topics in Tableau. And I'm thrilled to say that they're all part of our team now. So we're bringing them here today, and we've given Chris a little break today so we can take on over here and do this. So you're going to have a blast today. So you're meeting our new experts, Christy and Sarah. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to share or say about yourselves or joining today and what you're looking forward to. Giving me shakes are all good. And then we do have two submitted questions so far. Again, if you're joining us and you didn't have a question at the time, but one comes to you at any time throughout today, put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat and we'll take over those. The good news is with this group of women here, there is no shortage of topics or words that we can share with you about data. We got a lot of info in our heads, and there's a whole lot that we're happy to share. So we're going to start off with the submitted questions, and then we're going to move into some best practices. We're going to give you some tips and tricks and maybe a little passionate debate. You'll notice there's a couple verses, table counts versus LODs and relationships versus joins. And this even live happened today where we were solving a problem with one of our client meetings for consulting, and we were using a join, and lo and behold, the relationship came into the rescue. And so there's some heated debate about when to use them and things. So we'll talk about that. And then one of our favorite things to use for Christy in particular, she's going to give you a little lessons on set actions. Woohoo! And then after that, and in between, I'll be asking for open Q&A questions. So we can always table our table calcs if we need to. We can always table any of the things that we had thought that we might share with you today, because it's most important that we answer your questions that you come to the table with. So know that we have that chat open, and we'll be looking forward to covering all of those things. So um, let's, with no further ado, Io, and I don't know if Io is on the call yet either. I know she was emailing with us and things. I don't see her on the call. But one of the things that she was really interested in talking about was layout containers and templates. And she was also interested in LODs. So those were the questions submitted by Io today. So Christy, I'm going to let you start talking about layout containers a bit, and I will stop sharing my screen, and I'll let you talk about the layout containers and how you like using them and things like that too.
Okay, and this one I think is a controversial topic. So, Sarah, Heather, please feel free to chime in with your own opinions and thoughts. So, for those folks who are here on the call, please let me know out loud or in chat, whatever works for you. Give me a thumbs up, a yes, a woohoo, any positive. If you're really comfortable with layout containers, if that's something that you've used quite a bit and you feel good about how those work in your life, feel free to give me a sad face, a thumbs down, or any specific gripe if you're like, you know what, those are just not my friend and we will never be getting along well. That's a relationship I don't plan on building. Okay, well, I think it's mainly us who have opinions on this, so I'll go with that, but keep it as short as I possibly can. You may have noticed that I did go ahead and just open up an existing Tableau workbook, and sorry, there's my little controllers. I knew I could find them somewhere. I am new-ish to Zoom. So, okay, love containers. Excellent. You're the only opinion we have so far, so we'll go with that. And Virginia, if you've got any big tips, please feel free to help us out. I'm just going to do a quick 5-minute intro. We've got a few dashboards that are already built here. I've just gone into one of the Tableau Global Superstore starters just to see what's possible. And I just going to go ahead and right click and delete this dashboard so that I can unhide the sheets under and have those in and ready to go so I can play with them. So as we start looking at the containers, come on, something not letting me do anything. There we go. I like to keep things simple, and my first controversial statement of the day, I like to float things. I don't leave them floated, but I start with them floated because, as you'll notice, if we come over and start building a dashboard, if I tell Tableau, hey, I'm just going to drag in this darn sheet, it goes ahead and gives me all sorts of containers and nice little layout things. But if we go over to our layout tab, you'll notice it is tiled. Tiled layout containers are the bane of my existence because they really start to limit what we can and can't do. So if I use my down arrow over here, you'll notice we've got a few little options that if instead of bringing in that container, go ahead and delete that container. If instead, as I go ahead and drag in, I tell Tableau first, let me bring in a container. Come on. Well, let's float it in so we can make it happen a little more cleanly. As we bring in that container, come on, there we go. When we bring that in and come on over to the layout area, you'll notice it says layout container instead, and using our little down arrow, look at how many different choices we have here that we didn't before. Things like distribute contents evenly allows us to let the containers decide how things are laid out and how things are not laid out. So that's just the one quick note. But the main thing I'm going to call attention to on these layout containers is that as we start floating these and then pulling items in, I just kind of treat it like little boxes and we build from the inside out. So I always start with a napkin, piece of paper, top of my table, whatever's available, and I draw out the basic layout of how I want that dashboard. And then I draw little boxes around everything that is going to go in it. And I start from the smallest box. So if I know that these two sheets need to be tied side by side, well, now that I've got that floating container in, we're back to tiled, and I can put those into that floating container. And so now as I bring those items into that container, that dark blue outline shows me where it's landing, and you'll notice we still ended up with that tiled container in the background. So Tableau is still giving us all that stuff in the background. But what this does is let me go through and figure out what my containers are going to be, how things are going to kind of stack together. And then at the end of the day, I can go through and get rid of those tiled containers, or I can just say, hey, you know what? Let's take this one container and turn off floating with it. So when we turn off floating, that snaps it into the background and I've got a much cleaner layout. And again, I can go through and do things like distribute contents evenly. But this lets me control the nesting that happens over here on the left. So I've got a lot more leeway and a lot more play so I can pick up and move things as pieces. Now I'm going to leave that as everything I talk about on layout containers. And if that sparked any questions, ask them. We'll keep going. If not, I'll turn it back over to Heather to see if there's any add-ons around different templates here at Boulder Insights. Any questions, comments, concerns? Random musings.
Anything?
You're
No.
up, Heather.
How many of you are team tiled? Give us a one in the chat if you're team tiled, a two if you're team floating. We're seeing ones, some there. Yep, we'll see. But I have, when I was first teaching, I got to say, I only knew about tiled. I didn't know about floating at first. And then as I started working with floating, it kind of changed my world. So I think what I'm going to actually do, I was trying to pull up some of the templates right now, and I did not find the one that I wanted yet. So what I'm going to do is come back to the template question, if we have time for that. And I'll give you the link to be able to download free templates from us, but we'll come back to that one. And I think what we'll do is move on to the LODs. Oh, I'm seeing we actually switch as needed in some of the comments. Let me pull up the chat again with some of the, yeah. So I do think it depends too on some of the organizations that we work with and things, but we're getting both a one and two, both as needed, we're all seeing. But the layout containers, Christy, very popular. We all can't live without it, is what Nadia has even said. And Virginia loves containers. So we've got lots of good things happening there. So Io, I hope that answered your questions about layout containers. We'll talk about templates in a little bit. And we're also going to be talking about templates on July 15th for a webinar that we're doing called From Zero to Hero. So we'll go deep into that as well. But knowing that some of the other topics are a little bit longer to cover and things, the next thing we want to talk about is LODs. And so some of you might be watching this and saying, what is an LOD? What does that even stand for? So I know there's an alphabet soup that exists in every industry that's out there. So LOD stands for level of detail, and it's a type of calculation in Tableau that was a big deal when it came out. And that's, where I'm going to hand this off to Sarah. And I will be honest, when they first came out, I had been started in version 3 of Tableau, and they came out like version 4. So I didn't live long without them, and I couldn't understand why it was such a big deal. Now I get it. But I once had to try to solve an issue with an LOD calculation that, Chris challenged me with, like, okay, if you don't think there's such a big deal, solve this. And it was a cohort analysis, guys, that I had to solve, and I could not do it without the LODs. So anyway, Miss Sarah, I'm going to hand this over to you. I can keep this slide up for a
Awesome.
bit if you want, or I can take that down.
No,
Um,
actually, I'm gonna share my screen. Um,
awesome. And I apparently raised my hand. I'm going to try to lower.
well, what questions do you have?
I have none at the moment until
Oh,
after you
wow.
speak. There we
All
go. That
right.
was hysterical for my
So,
reactions then earlier.
let's talk a little bit about LODs. And one of the things I like to start off with when we talk about level of detail expressions is what is level of detail anyway? Little Taylor Swift reference here. Hopefully everybody gets that. Um, but level of detail are the dimensions that we pull into our view. So our slicers, what fields are we taking an aggregate number? So in this case, sum of sales. What are we slicing that number by? Are we slicing it by region and segment or both? Um, Level detail tells us at what level our view is, right? So in this case, the level of detail of this top view is region and segment. So we get a bar or a slice for each segment and region combination. Um, Next, just to talk a little bit about syntax, we have 3 different types of level of detail expressions. We have our fixed, include, and exclude. Then we pass in those dimensions to essentially set the level of detail of our calculation. And then we aggregate some sort of measure. Now, one thing I forgot to say is why would we ever use level of detail expressions? So level of detail expressions allow us to write a calculation that is at a different level of detail than our view. So in this case, the level of detail of our view is region and segment. We could say, okay, even though I want to show segment in my view, I want to write a calculation that's at the region level, or even though it's region and segment, I actually want to write a calculation that is at the customer level, right? So level of detail expressions allow us to write a calculation that is at a different level of detail than our view. So, like I said, the 3 different types, we have fixed. This is used when we want to specify dimensions regardless of what is in our view. So we have very specific dimensions that we want to use, and we don't care what the level of detail of our view is. We are just writing our calculation at that level. The kind of difference between fixed and include and exclude is that fixed will ignore filters except for context, data source, and extract filters. And then we have include and exclude. And these are kind of, brother and sister, whereas fixed is a distant cousin or maybe a second cousin. So include and exclude are very, their names tell us what they're going to do. For include, we are computing a value for specific dimensions that are in the view plus additional dimensions. So we're adding dimensions within our calculation, and it recognizes all filters. And then exclude, all of the same, recognizes these context, data source, extract filters, just like fixed does, or in opposition to how fixed works. And then we have exclude, where we're computing values and we're excluding dimensions from our view. And the same. So include and exclude take that level of detail of your view and either include or exclude dimensions. They care about filters. They care about the level of detail of your view, whereas fixed does not. So let's look at an example. I should probably open, here we go, let me open this. Has anybody used level of detail expressions before? Christy, thank goodness. Heather, wow. Oh, Virginia, nice. Yes, okay, couple people. So you
Omo
guys
has
might,
too.
yes, I see that. That's great. Okay, we have some no's. Great, love that. So let's look at an example. Let me make sure that I'm not taking up any space here with the Zoom controls. So this is a view of orders per customer. Can anybody tell me what the level of detail of this view is? And based on what we just talked about, what is the level of detail of this view? I'm gonna put up my chat again. I'll give you a hint. It's two things. There's two things. You don't have to name both. You can just give me one. Any guesses?
There's no shame in this game. So there you go. Todd got it.
Todd coming in with the win. All right, so totally order ID and customer. So we have order ID and customer in this view, customer name, order ID. Again, it's determined by our dimensions, what our slicers are. And when we look at something like this, our data set, we have different orders per customer. And a lot of times, if you think about your Amazon order that you maybe made last week or some order, that order, you know, you get one order number, but there might be multiple items within that order. So like with your real life order that you might have made online, this data set has multiple items per order. So if I click on one of these orders and I view the data, I can see that there are two different lines or two different rows or two different items for this particular order. And then when we pull that into the view, we're summing up that order, those multiple rows, within this bar here for this 564. Now, this view is very long and very scrolly and isn't super helpful. It's very busy. There's lots and lots of text. So what you might think is, okay, well, I'll just take order ID out of the view. And instead, you know, where this reference line is averaging each of my orders, I will just take my sales and I'll say average sales for each customer. But if you notice, we look at our very first one here, we get 148 for Aaron. But here, that reference line that's averaging, we get 295. So the big thing with our LODs is specifying that denominator. So whenever we look at something like average, we're saying, okay, sum of sales divided by some amount of something else, right? So in this case, we have sum of sales divided by 1, 2, 3 orders. Now, when we just do average sales, we're actually saying sum of sales divided by amount of rows. That's just the default when we use average, when we use that aggregation within Tableau. So what we want to do is we want our view to be at this level of detail, so just customer, but we want our calculation to be at this level of detail, so customer name and order ID. What I love doing when I have something like this is I will create the view that I want. right? I'll say, okay, this is how I want my calculation to work. I want it to work based on customer name and order ID. And then I create a calculated field. And in this case, we're going to use fixed. Fixed is the most common. We're going to use fixed. And then I can just drag and drop exactly what I have in my view in order to create that calculation. Because I've already created the view based on the level of detail that I want my calculation. So I can just use that view to create my calculation. So I'm saying fixed, which is my keyword, and then my dimension names or the level of detail of this calculation. And then I'm aggregating. Now I'm going to click out because I already created this calculation, but that's how I like building these, is knowing exactly how I want them to look and using the view to build the calculation.
Chris would fully agree. He is a big fan of dragging and dropping the pills from the view into
Yes,
his too. So if
love it.
anybody is a returning customer client,
You
attendee
know
of this,
that
they're
trick
used to seeing
already.
that
Love
trick.
it.
So that's a great one, Sarah, to show.
Okay, so I created this calculation. I'm going to go here where I have average sales, and it's that 148 for Aaron, which we know is not the number that we want. And I'm going to pull out my fixed calculation instead. So now what it's doing is, if I look at this 886, it says sum of orders per customer. So I'm taking all those orders and I'm summing them up, and then I'm summing them up again per customer. So this is just the same as if I just did sum of sales per customer. What I'm going to do once I have it in my view is I'm actually going to change that aggregation to average, so that I can say sum up each order, and then average it per customer. And then you can see that that value changes. We're no longer pulling in the 148. We're pulling in that 295. So that's our fixed calculation. And now we have that fixed orders per customer. Then a lot of the times people say, okay, well, I could get this done with fixed. Can I also get it done with include? And absolutely you can. We can do kind of the same thing. We already have customer name in our view. So I am actually going to write a new calculation. And this is going to be my orders per customer include. And we're going to say include. And these two calculations are going to be at the same level of detail, because I'm going to say, all right, I already have customer name in my view. Then I'm going to say include order ID. So because it cares about the level of detail of my view first, it's going to do that. And then I'm going to sum up my sales. And we're going to pull this out and replace it. And then just like we did before, once it's in our view, we're going to change that to average. And that's going to give us that same 295. Okay. The big difference between these two, and this is a question that people ask a lot. Okay, if I can get it done with both of them, if I can do it with fixed and with include, why would I do one over the other? And it all goes back to that very first thing that we talked about those filters. So if we have any filters that we want to make sure that the calculation recognizes, then we're going to use that include. If we have filters that we want the calculation to not pay attention to at all, we're going to use that fixed. Okay, any questions? I can do a really quick exclude if we'd like to see it, but I don't want to take up too much time because I know we have a lot of things that we want to talk about.
I say finish the loop, Sarah. Let's give them
All
an
right,
exclude,
love it. Okay,
just in
so
case.
yeah, just in case. All right, so with exclude, the thing that I love doing with this is actually doing more ratios. So instead of looking at averages and things like that, we can actually look at more of a ratio. So we can take these values, and again, let's say we want to look at average sales per customer and divide it by the total average sales for all orders. And we can do that in a couple of different ways. So we can take our fixed LOD, which is our average orders per customer, right? Our fixed, which is that 295. And then we can say, all right, we want to compare that 295 to the average order across all customers. So in this case, I am going to, and actually I'm going to switch this up a little bit. I'm actually going to compare my average sales, so average like item sales, to my average sales overall. So we're going to average sales. And we'll just do exclude. So this time, again, because exclude takes that level of detail of our calculation and excludes dimension, we're going to say exclude customer name and then average sales. So now we have our average sales, which is our row level sales, right? We say for Aaron, this customer, his average sales per item is 148. And now we're going to exclude customer and we're going to find our average sales per item across our entire data set. Another way to do this, again, there's a lot of these things where you can do it a couple of different ways. We could also do fixed on nothing and say average sales that way, right? These are going to give us very similar, these are going to give us same value in this particular case because we're excluding customer name, which means there's no dimensions in the view, versus fixed. And it goes back to that same thing that we were talking about, when to use fixed versus when to use include. It depends on filters, when we want to look at those filters and when we don't. So I'm going to say exclude customer name, average sales. And then when I pull that out into my view, I'm going to get, oh, hey, don't do that. I'm going to get the same value for every single customer in the whole data set, right? Because I've excluded customer and I'm averaging those sales across the entire data set. So I can take that constant, right? In this case, constant across all customers, and I can compare it to my average sales. So we can do this a couple of different ways. Sometimes what I like to do is I will double click on that value that's pulled out into the view, and we can then just find a really quick difference. And I can say average, oh golly, sales minus our exclude. And that's going to give us that difference from average sales. So Aaron is $81 below our average sales per item for his average sales.
Mhm.
I also love
My goodness, Lord. I forgot again. What in the world?
we lost it.
I don't think
we gotta
so.
we got a mute here.
Jordan, if you could help us find who that is.
Thank you. I also, when you create those ad hoc calculations directly in your view, you can use your command key on a Mac or your control key on a PC. I haven't been on a PC in a minute, but you can copy that field to another place like color, and then you can see which of your customers are above or below that average.
This is a lot, I know, for people
It
to take in.
is,
LODs
yes,
are pretty
especially for a short period
awesome.
of time.
It is. So we're at the point in the program where I'm going to ask you all a question. So I just put it in the chat. The question for you is, how did you hear about Tableau Live? And by the way, we're so glad you're here, but let us know that as we go back in. Sarah, this was awesome. Really, I always struggle with the clearest way to teach it so it's not overwhelming. That I even felt less overwhelmed watching you do that just now. So that is awesome. So we are going to go into some of our
Right.
SmackDown conversations. And I do have my
Great.
Tableau found. I'll pull that up too, but let me
Awesome.
present my screen and I'll share here again and get to my Zoom. So where we're going to head next, and if we, like I said, if we have time, we'll go into templates. But since Io's not here, I want to make sure we're getting into the other things. So, Miss Christie, this is when we're going to bring you into the passionate debate that I like to call it, rather than a smackdown because it feels too aggressive.
That's
So this
fair.
is passionate debate. Sarah just blew our minds with some really awesome things with LODs and how powerful they can be. But I know when we talked about LODs yesterday, there's also a time that a table calc can work better than an LOD. And why? I have some things that I could talk about from performance and other things, but would love for you to take Sarah on. Sarah's got her muscles up. She's ready to talk about when you might use a table calc versus an LOD. And I'll stop sharing my screen in case you all have anything you want to share. So.
So don't get me wrong, I think LODs are great, but I guess question for the group. There's often a difference between how many rows of data you have and how much data you're exposing in a view. So, for example, I might have web analytics data is what I most recently worked on. I might have 1 trillion clicks on buttons on my website, and every one of those clicks is recorded separately in the database, but there's only 6 buttons. So when we want to count how many of those buttons were clicked, we end up aggregating that up by those 6 buttons. So we go from 1 trillion rows to 6 shown in the view. Again, show of hands, yes, or more detail in chat. How many of you deal with that quite a bit as well, where your data, the underlying data is significantly larger by a huge factor than the data that you're displaying? In other words, you're rolling up a lot of information. Give me a yes if that's you. Give me a no if it's more, I have my numbers already kind of calculated and I'm just displaying them. Okay. So it looks like we've got 2 yeses. A couple of you have that underlying data. So that's where table calc versus LOD can be a bit more controversial. Um, because level of detail calculations are row level calculations. So if you've got a live connection, you're hitting against that live database, it's going back and doing those LOD calculations on all of the individual rows. So depending on how many rows you have or how fast your database is, that can perform quickly or slowly. In addition, as Sarah pointed out, you've got some of the issues of different filters working against them differently. Table calculations are on the opposite end of the spectrum. Table calculations happen on top of the rolled up data. So if I started off with 1 trillion records and try to do a ratio calculation on those, like a fixed calculation to get me that ratio, I'm doing that on all of them. But if I wait and do that as a table calculation, then I'm doing it only on 6 of those rows. So it can go a whole lot faster. So almost anything you can do with an exclude level of detail. In other words, going back to Sarah's build your worksheet and then look at it. If you build the worksheet and look at the dimensions that are on that worksheet and realize you just need to remove one, you just need to go higher for more of that exclude, consider doing a table calculation because those move nicely with the view and can work a whole lot faster. So that's the main thing I wanted to offer up on table calcs. They can be, oh, they're so fun. They can get really confusing under the covers because you've got table across, table down, but you can mix and match and go in all sorts of different directions. So there's a lot of power there. And I'm happy to demo anything around those if we'd like, but that's the main thing I wanted to offer up. From a performance standpoint, if you're aggregating significantly, think about table calcs.
I love it, Christy. And Sarah, any rebuttal to anything Sarah said, to Christy said?
Oh my gosh, no way. I no, I think that it's such whenever we talk about performance, and especially with understanding what calculation to use in different situations, unfortunately, most of the time it depends, right? And it really depends on how you're bringing that data in, what you're displaying, and and then that final, how do you want to then change it within the view? So I'm a big fan of using what's appropriate for the situation. So
I love it.
very dependent on what situation you're in, whether you use one or the other.
Yeah, I love it. And, it really is. Even, when I was in college, I was an RA, a senior RA, and had a team, and we had to go through training, and you were either a strawberry, a vanilla, or a chocolate. And I came out Neapolitan. And it's really because it's situational, right? It really comes down to the situation. They were like, Heather, you really got to be one or the other. I'm like, I'm not. Like, I agree to these things. So I do think Neapolitan is our call to action today, that strawberry, vanilla, and chocolate all can live together and taste lovely. It's just a matter of knowing when to use which. And so I think in our next Tableau Live, maybe we'll go deeper into table calcs. But today it was all about the versus, the LODs, and chances of when you might want to use those. So back to our questions today. The other thing that comes into play when we start talking about table calcs versus LODs, there's also some heated debate around relationships versus joins. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And this is also a graphic talking about the logical layer and the physical layer in Tableau. So in version 2020, I think point 5, point 3, point 2 was when relationships came out. So you didn't have a choice before. You either had to work in the physical layer and do joins or unions there. Blends would take place in the worksheet, but there wasn't an opportunity to do what's called a relationship. And you get a little noodle when it comes out and you're working in that data source page. So the logical layer is smart, and that's where it allows for relationships to happen that won't inflate the data like the physical layer joins will do sometimes, and why you would need a fixed LOD to be able to do that. So I'm gonna, this is the graphic that I have here. I'll take a screenshot, put into the chat for everyone, and then I'll let Sarah and Christy have a little bit of dialogue around this. And so let me ask you all before I give them the dialogue. I'll put this in. How many of you are a fan of relationships, and how many of you are a fan of joins? And you could say both. So give us an R for relationships, a J for joins, or use both. So we're seeing use both so far. Virginia's telling us use both.
Can we
Yeah.
toss in a question mark if you're not sure of the difference? That's super
Yeah.
useful to know also.
Question mark is another one. So let me stop sharing my screen. And we'll just talk this through. If you guys have any, we had a use case today where the relationship actually was helpful. And again, I think this might be the Neapolitan day, where it's when the situation is best and right for it as well. So let me stop my screen share. I don't know that I was sharing. I was. Okay, there we go. And we'll just talk this through,
Yeah.
relationships. We're seeing use both from a lot of people and
And
nothing at all from others. So,
I'm fine keeping up that
oh, great.
yeah, if Christy is, you're good with that.
Yes.
I think thank you. I again, so as Heather was saying earlier, she said that she wasn't using Tableau for very long before LODs came out. And I was kind of the opposite of, I was using joins for a very, very long
Ever,
time before
ever.
relationships came out. So sometimes it's a little hard to adjust. Um, and and so one of the things that I loved about our discussion, our internal discussion earlier today, is we had talked about doing a join on a particular data set. And when you do a join, as long as you understand joins well and the different types, you know exactly what you're going to be getting as part of that output, right? So when I do an inner join, I know, as long as I know those data sets very well, I know what that output is going to look like. And that will then help me understand, do I need to write a row level calculation? Do I need to write a fixed calculation? And help me understand that. So for my very, very concrete brain, sometimes a join is something that I need to do to help understand my data a little bit better, understand what I have to do. Now, in our situation that happened earlier, we had said, okay, let's do these joins, let's write these calculations, and then it was like, oh, we're going to have to write a bunch of calculations and fixed calculations and all of that, and it, you know, as I said earlier, I heard Christy's voice in my head saying, just use a relationship, right? And so it's one of those things that we have to understand both of them to know what's going to work best in the situation that we have. So our physical layer is where we define those joins. The downside of joins, as many of you probably know, it looks like a lot of people have used both relationships and joins, or at least a few of you have, is there's the possibility of duplicating rows. If you have different levels of detail in your tables, you can potentially duplicate. And then we're having to dive really deep into those LOD calculations to get the output that we want. Whereas, and I'll pass this over to Christy, we might be able to use a relationship to not duplicate those rows and use Tableau's brain instead of our own.
I'd say for me, similar. I have a deep love of relationships. So deep. And again, the web analytics data I got to play with recently is a lot of where that came from. Now, I've got a tiny demo I can pull up of joins and relationships if anyone wants to see the difference to what Sarah referenced there of that duplication. So please chime in on chat or give us some emojis if there's a yes to that. Otherwise, I just want to extend on the other use case that I like for relationships. So let me know if you want the demo. Otherwise, again, with web analytics data, one of the things that I ran into recently is how often ratios are important. So I might have how many times did someone visit a certain page? Okay, if they visited that page, did they add something to their cart? Okay, if they added something to their cart, did they actually order it? And then we want ratios for all sorts of different things within that. Well, if we know Tableau as we filter and everything, we don't want to pre-calculate those ratios in our database, because if I exclude one community or leave out one day, that changes that ratio. So we dynamically do those in Tableau. If I've done joins on my data, or if I'm introducing that ratio in, there's a couple ways we can do it. Number one is we can reference the values that are already there. Oh, 10 people visited, we'll divide that by the 20 people who added to cart, or reverse that to get our ratio. But you're writing case statements in order to do that, or taking two columns and doing the math together, or pretty frequently having to do a level of detail calculation to get your denominator. So ratios actually get weirdly complicated in Tableau with joins. But if you introduce a reference table, so for example, if we've got one field that lists all the different measures, add to cart, visit site, place order, you can write a reference table that just says, hey, take the rate and divide one measure by another, and just detail those out and link back based on that measure name. And then Tableau essentially writes all of the calculations for you. So that relationship, because of the way they work, if I've got all my measures in one table, I can go back and re-reference them from another. Again, we've got a performance improvement. My calculations are less complicated. My formulas that I have to write are easier to maintain, and Tableau just kind of magically writes the calculations a little cleaner. So I find that relationships, if I'm doing anything that results in a lot of level of detail calculations, case statements to isolate, or anything else, restructuring that data for relationships can make a huge difference. So that's my 2 cents on that one. Just extending past the level of detail, they're huge, huge performance boon if your data would be exploded out in size otherwise. So capping it there. Any
Love it.
thoughts?
Any demo wanted by anybody? Okay. Well, with the time we have left, I do think then I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. Let me look at the chat one more time. No live Q&A coming through. I do think Christy is 15 minutes, well, really 13 minutes, let's say. I'll need two at the end to go through set actions. This is her favorite. Is that enough time?
I just wiggled in my own seat. Hold on just a second. Let me pull this up to share.
All
Uh,
right, and I'll stop sharing mine. So she's going to talk about proportionate contribution control, current versus previous period, and perhaps if we have time comparing over time as well. So Christy, I'm going to hand this over to you.
all right. So I had an intense visceral reaction against the set feature in Tableau for a very, very long time. And I think a lot of that reason was they were so heavily pushed by Tableau, and they were usually pushed with some kind of weird double entendre or something that was just like vaguely suggestive. And I always found that a little bit off putting. Now, you should be seeing my dashboards right now, not my messy other desktop. Is that true? Everybody seeing a
True.
dashboard?
You
Or
got the right screen,
awesome.
girl.
So, I have since fallen in love with the concept of a set in Tableau. So, again, just to know where I am going to be best spending my time based on who's here, I want to show you a couple of things that I find that sets make a whole lot easier in life. And then I want to check in and see if we already know what sets are. So, I'm actually going to start with that first piece. In chat, let me, or with your emojis, yes, if you already are familiar with a set as a concept and creating a basic set. No, if you've heard of them, but maybe they're not as high on your radar. So yes means a basic demo is useful, is not useful. A no means, hey, a basic demo of just what a set is would be helpful. Okay, so it looks like a set. Oh, you're sending me to my happy place. Okay. So why do I love sets? Let me talk about some things that I find incredibly difficult to do in general. Number one is comparing current to previous period or current period to an offset other time frame that I haven't defined before. If that's something that you have to do and is hard, let me know because a set makes that so simple. So right here, I can put in whatever start date I want and whatever end date. And what you'll notice is that my system automatically is allowing me to see how that compares to a previous period, and it adjusts those comparisons so we can see that overlay. That is something that a set can make very simple. Another comparison, another thing sets can do, and so that one's just a set in the background. This one's even more fun. This takes a set and extends it with something called a set action. So in this case, what we're seeing is, hey, total gift amount. So what we're looking at, by the way, is these are donations to a university. So based on someone who went to that school, they come back and make a donation. How much are they donating? Well, if we go to each one of the colleges, people who graduated from the different colleges, this is a running total during that time period. But we can pick and see, well, how does this one compare to the others? So now how does natural science compare to everyone else? Or if we want to look at more than one college at a time, we can select more than one and we can see those two versus people who attended the other colleges. So when we talk about things like data literacy and helping your end users really understand what's going on, this is one really nice way to get them there is let them interact with the data and say, great, that's everything, but how does this one piece compare? That's a set. So that also is a set, but now I'm using one worksheet to control it rather than going through and building that ahead of time. So my users can make those choices. Same thing, proportionate contribution. So in this particular case, now we're looking at, hey, what year did people who donated during that time period graduate? And so now we're seeing, whoops, that looks like the most common year. Well, people from that year, what are they donating to? Same thing, we can click. So by clicking, now we see proportionate contribution. What portion of all contributions to one of these locations was made from people who graduated that specific year? So again, more of that cohort analysis, that comparison gets a little bit easier.
That is
Last but
my
not
alumni
least,
year, by the way, is 1992 from my undergraduate. So
excellent
just
year.
who
Good
knew?
vintage.
Who knew? Excellent year.
And last but not least, this exact same view. Notice that I've been interacting with the view, but sometimes we just want that pick list. So notice that that exact same thing that I can do, I can use this down arrow and I can use what feels like a quick filter to go through and make those exact same choices. So now I can go through and pick from a list and have everything update. And what's so profound about this is how often do I want to use a filter to narrow everything down to just a few values or just a few students, just a few locations, but I don't want to eliminate it everywhere. Sometimes I want to see, well, what percent about everything is that? And then on another view, just narrow it down. Well, this one set control lets me do both of those at the same time. So, I can't tell you how much I love sets, whether it's the set controls, the actions, or the sets themselves. But since it looks like everyone here is relatively new to sets, I'm going to start with a basic build. Okay. So if I come on over to a brand new worksheet and we'll start with that graduation year. So here's the records of everyone who gave gifts. And as we go down, we've got this field that says, hey, here's the year that they graduated. Now, this is a dimension. I did make it a dimension because we don't want to add those up. But because it's a dimension, I can now right click on it. And one of my choices is to create a set. Now, if I just create a random set with absolutely nothing in it, cool, we're done. But notice I can go through and check off these boxes, and I'll call this one my manual year set. And when I click OK, Tableau creates that manual year set right here. And if I bring that into my view to the left of my dimension, you'll notice those years that I picked are now listed here. Those years that I didn't pick are listed as out. So that's all it's doing is isolating things into that or out of it. Okay. Now that's the first step. Now I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this set over here on the left-hand side, and I'm going to right click and rename it because I'm going to call this one my dynamic year set. Now, it shouldn't surprise anyone if I get rid of that manual set and I bring my dynamic year set in instead, and you'll notice that, hey, it matches because I copied the same thing. Surprise. Okay. But I want this one to be something that my end users can update. Well, we know in Tableau that if you interact with a view, anytime you interact with a view and cause something to happen, that's an action. So in this case, if I come up to my worksheets and I go to worksheet actions, notice I'm at worksheet actions, not dashboard actions, because I'm doing this on one worksheet right now. So if I go in and add that here as an action, I can add in for just this sheet. I'm going to add in that change set values. So when I choose to change those set values, I will call this my select year, and I'm on sheet 9, and I will target that dynamic year set. So I'm saying when I make a selection, update that set. And I've got all sorts of different choices. So I can assign new things to it. So replace what's there, just add these new values into it. And when I clear it, I can choose what happens. Get rid of it, add them all back in, make different choices. So now when I click OK and click OK to have that action in place, if I click on one of these sets in my view, notice how it's moving it into the in spot. So that's all that's happening if we take a look at any one of these dashboards. In this current versus previous period, we've used parameters to say, hey, we've got a current date set that starts and ends in a certain period of time. That becomes my filter for every single worksheet. So I have a set that I use to filter each of these worksheets. As we come on over and take a look, right here I have a set that says take everything that is in the current period or the previous period, so sets that build that, and only allow that information to come through, but break my lines up by different colors on whether they're in the current period or the previous. So using these sets narrows the data down and then isolates it so that we can view it a little bit differently. That's all a set does, is simply decide, how do I want to control it? Do I, as the developer, want to decide? Well, then I'll right click and add it from here. Do I want my end user to update it? Well, then that's a worksheet action, either a worksheet action or a dashboard action, or my personal favorites, which is, let's just replace our quick filter. This right here is a set control. So if I started off on a worksheet, for this worksheet, I've built my dynamic year set. I can right click and simply tell Tableau to add it to the sheet, to bring it on in and use it as a filter, and that becomes my control that I can use to adjust. Now, we said we wanted to leave 3 minutes for Heather to wrap up, so I think that puts us at 3 minutes right here. I'll go ahead and stop
So
share.
good. Loving the set actions. I have not seen them used as a quick filter like that, and I think that is so awesome. So very, very cool. I will go ahead and share my screen. I've got one more question for folks. Last question of the day. How many of you are Tableau server users at your organization? And how many of you are Tableau Cloud? If you're Tableau server, give us a TS. If you're Tableau Cloud, give us a TC. Okay, we're getting a mix, a little bit of both. We have both at ours too, Io. So I see that too. Let me just show you. So if you are using Tableau Server, we just want to point out, we know that all of the talk right now is around Tableau Cloud and AI and the agents and all the things that offer. Have no fear. We were at Tableau conference. They haven't forgotten about you, server people. And they do have some more features that are going to be coming your way. But we want you to know that we can help you if you need a Tableau admin. We have something called Tableau Server Guard. If you've just not upgraded your Tableau server in many, many years and you need to do that, we have some other plans where we can help you with that. And if you're planning on switching, we can also help with Tableau Cloud migrations as well. So just want you to know we do more than just training and consulting, that we all know all about the servers inside and out and moving to cloud. So just know we're here to support you in any way with that. We just want you to know to reach out to us for those supports if you need that. Also, if you want to use your own data, you can get on Chris's calendar and do a 30-minute strategy session with us where we can see your own data rather than us using sample data in here. We're also going to start adding links for Christy, for myself, for Sarah into these too moving forward so you can meet with us. And we would love for you to join us again in July. So sign up for the July. Tell us how we did. You can we have a very short survey for you all. I'll put that link in there for you all to let us know how we did. And I'll also give you that direct link for the sign up for July as well, because we'd love to have you come back. And we know that you may have questions that come up after this call. Know that you can go ahead and register and put your question in when you do, and that will allow us to be able to know which questions to answer next month. So we'll just add them to the queue and keep on answering. So we're so glad that you joined us and took time out of your busy lives. I hope that the girl power that took over the Tableau Live this time is something you all enjoyed as well. I know I did. So have a wonderful rest of June, and we'll see you in July. Take care, everybody.